The brass casings were still warm when Cassidy Weaver bent down to collect them. Her gloved hands worked methodically across the dirt-packed training range, depositing the spent shells into her canvas bag with practiced efficiency. 3 months of this routine had turned her movements into something automatic, almost meditative. Bend, collect, drop. Bend, collect, drop. The rhythm of invisibility. The Afghanistan sun had already climbed high enough to turn the air into something you could almost chew, thick with diesel exhaust from the motor pool, heavy with weapon oil from the armory, and underneath it all, that smell she could never quite name. Tension maybe, the kind that settled into your bones when you lived close enough to hear distant artillery most nights. She was 26 years old, lean from manual labor rather than gym workouts. Sandy blonde hair pulled back tight under her patrol cap, regulation tight, not a strand out of place. The other cleaning crew members called her Weaver. Sometimes they didn't call her anything at all. She preferred it that way. Invisible was easier. Invisible meant you could watch without being watched. And Cassidy Weaver had been watching the SEALs train for 3 months now. Every morning at 0600 like clockwork. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Holloway ran his sniper team through their paces with the kind of precision that made Cassidy's chest ache with something she couldn't quite identify. Longing maybe, or recognition. Like watching someone speak a language you used to know fluently but had forgotten how to form the words. Holloway was 34, with the kind of weathered face that came from a decade of desert deployments and mountain operations. His skin had that permanent tan that went deeper than color etched into the lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw. When he spoke, his voice carried across the range like gravel sliding down a hillside. Rough but controlled. Every word measured. Nothing wasted. When Holloway moved, it was with the economy of motion that marked true operators. No excess energy, no casual gestures. Everything purposeful. Everything deliberate. His spotter, Bryce Donovan, was younger by 5 years but moved with the same deadly efficiency. Where Holloway was granite solid and immovable, Donovan was coiled wire. Quick, sharp, always scanning the horizon like he expected threats to materialize from thin air. The two of them operated together with the kind of silent communication Cassidy had only seen once before in her life. Her parents, before the accident that took them both. Garrett Tanner, the breacher everyone called Bull, completed the team. Built like a refrigerator with a personality to match. Friendly enough when you caught him in the mess hall, but focused like a laser when he was on the range. These men didn't come here to socialize. They came here to survive. Cassidy straightened up, pressing one hand against her lower back where the muscles had started to protest. The bag of brass was getting heavy. 40 pounds, maybe 50. She'd carry it to the collection point, empty it, come back for more. Same routine, same invisibility. But her eyes kept drifting toward the observation platform where Holloway was adjusting the scope on his rifle, the Mk13 Mod 7. Even from 50 meters away, Cassidy could identify every component. The matte black finish on the heavy barrel, the distinctive profile of the Schmidt and Bender PM2 scope, probably the 525-56 model, the adjustable cheek piece on the stock, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, effective range well beyond 1,000 meters in the right hands. She knew these details because she'd read about this weapon during her brief aborted attempt at joining the Army Marksmanship Unit back in Montana. That felt like another lifetime now, another woman's dream. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old. Thomas Weaver had been a patient man, a methodical man, the kind of father who believed that skills were built one careful lesson at a time, like laying bricks for a foundation that would hold up a lifetime. Their first morning in the Bitterroot Valley, frost still clinging to the grass, he'd handed her a .22 rifle and spoken words she'd never forgotten. Dear season's coming, Cass. Time you learned what this family's been doing for 4 generations. She remembered the weight of that rifle, how impossibly heavy it had seemed in her 12-year-old hands, how her father had knelt beside her, his breath making small clouds in the cold morning air, and guided her through the fundamentals. Squeeze, don't pull. Let the shot surprise you. A sniper shoots with their heartbeat, not their eyes. She'd been good at it. Good enough that her high school shooting coach had started talking about Olympic prospects by the time she was 16. Good enough that recruiters from 3 different collegiate programs had come to watch her compete. Good enough that she'd let herself dream about standing on a podium someday, hearing her country's anthem play while a gold medal hung around her neck. But when her parents died in a 12-car pileup on Highway 93, those prospects died with them. Cassidy had been 17 years and 4 months old enough to understand exactly what she'd lost, young enough that the state decided she needed supervision for another 8 months before she could legally exist on her own. The foster system didn't care about rifle ranges and competition dreams. The foster system cared about paperwork and placement quotas and making sure she didn't become a statistic. She'd enlisted at 18 the day after she aged out of the system. The Army recruiter had smiled when she'd mentioned her marksmanship background, smiled and nodded and made notes on his form and talked about opportunities in specialized training programs. Sniper school, competition shooting, the chance to represent her country in ways that mattered. Then came the 4 words that had defined the last 8 years of her life: needs of the service. They needed cleaning crews more than they needed another wannabe sharpshooter. They needed someone to collect brass casings and mop floors and empty trash cans. They needed invisible people to do invisible work while the real warriors trained for the real missions. So here she was, 26 years old, 8 years of service, collecting brass casings while watching real shooters hone their craft. The morning had an unusual stillness to it. Cassidy paused in her work, lifting her head like a deer sensing a predator. The usual sounds of the forward operating base surrounded her. Generators humming in the distance, the occasional bark of orders from the training areas, vehicle engines and radio chatter, and all the mechanical rhythms of military life. But something was different. The radio chatter from the guard towers seemed muted. Even the wind had died down, leaving the air heavy and motionless. She'd learned to read this base's rhythms over her 3-month deployment, the way activity patterns shifted before convoys departed, the way tension levels rose and fell based on intelligence reports that filtered down through the ranks in whispers and knowing looks. This silence felt wrong. Cassidy scanned the perimeter, her eyes moving methodically across the landscape the way her father had taught her to scan for game, left to right, far to near, looking for movement, for patterns that didn't belong, for anything that triggered that ancient part of the brain that recognized danger before the conscious mind could name it. Nothing visible, nothing obvious. But the wrongness persisted. Holloway must have felt it too. She watched him stop adjusting his scope and reach for his binoculars instead. Watch the way his body language shifted from relaxed instruction to alert assessment. Donovan had moved to a different position on the platform, his own binoculars raised toward the northern hills. Tanner had set down the breaching charge he'd been examining and was checking his sidearm with the automatic efficiency of a man who'd done this 1,000 times before. Something was happening, or about to happen. Cassidy's pulse quickened despite her efforts to stay calm. She told herself she was being paranoid. The base had been quiet for weeks. No major incidents since the failed probe of the eastern perimeter back in August. Intelligence said the enemy had pulled back to regroup after taking heavy casualties in the summer offensive. Command said the region was stable enough for normal operations to continue. Command said a lot of things. She bent to collect another handful of casings, forcing her hands to maintain their rhythm, even as her senses stayed on high alert. The brass was cooling now, safe to handle without the thick gloves. She was thinking about returning her full bag to the collection point, thinking about maybe grabbing an early lunch before the mess hall got crowded, thinking about the letter she needed to write to the Veterans Affairs office about her father's death benefits that still hadn't been properly processed after 9 years. Normal thoughts, routine thoughts, the kind of thoughts that filled the empty spaces when you were invisible. She never heard the first mortar round launch. The whistle came first, that distinctive sound that every soldier learned to recognize and fear, the shriek of incoming ordnance cutting through the air with lethal intent. Cassidy had heard it in training videos, had heard it described by veterans who'd survived attacks. But nothing could prepare you for the reality of that sound coming directly at you. The world erupted. The first round hit the motor pool 200 meters to her left. The concussion wave slammed into Cassidy like a physical blow, lifting her off her feet and throwing her sideways. Brass casings scattered across the dirt like deadly confetti. Her canvas bag tore open somewhere in the chaos, spilling its contents in a golden spray. She hit the ground hard, her helmet absorbing some of the impact, but not enough to prevent stars from bursting across her vision. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. For 3 full seconds, she couldn't move. couldn't process what was happening, couldn't do anything except lie there in the dirt while her brain tried desperately to catch up with reality. Then the second round hit, closer this time, close enough that she felt the heat of the explosion on her exposed skin, close enough that debris rained down around her, chunks of concrete and twisted metal and things she didn't want to identify. The third round, the fourth, the fifth. The entire northern section of the base was erupting in flames and smoke. Cassidy scrambled to her feet, her training minimal, as it was finally kicking through the shock and terror. Get to cover. Find shelter. Don't become a casualty that someone else has to deal with. She was support personnel. Non-combatant. Her job right now was to stay alive and stay out of the way. She started running toward the nearest bunker, a reinforced concrete structure 60 meters to her south. Her legs felt strange beneath her, like they belonged to someone else. The ringing in her ears made it impossible to hear her own footsteps, impossible to hear the shouts of other soldiers scrambling for cover around her. Another explosion lifted her off her feet. This time she slammed into a concrete barrier, her shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. Pain lanced through her arms, sharp and immediate, but she forced herself to keep moving. Blood trickled down from somewhere above her left eye, warm and sticky, obscuring her vision on that side. Through the smoke and chaos, she could hear something else now. Automatic weapons fire, not outgoing, incoming. The enemy wasn't just lobbing mortars from a safe distance. They were here, inside the wire. This wasn't a harassment attack or a probe of the defenses. This was a full-scale assault, coordinated and planned, and executed with the kind of precision that spoke of professional military training. Someone had given them detailed information about this base. Someone had told them exactly when and where to strike. A hand grabbed her shoulder from behind, and Cassidy nearly screamed. She spun her arms, coming up in a defensive posture that would have been laughable against an actual combatant. But it wasn't an enemy fighter, it was Holloway. His face was covered in dust and blood from a gash across his left cheek. His equipment was torn in several places, and he was moving with a slight hitch in his step that suggested injuries she couldn't see. But his eyes were what caught her attention. Focused, deadly calm. Despite the chaos erupting around them, those eyes held the steady clarity of a man who had been in the situations like this before and survived. "Can you move?" he had to shout to be heard over the explosions. Cassidy nodded, not trusting her voice. "Stay with me. We're cut off from the main defensive positions." He pulled her toward a reinforced observation post 30 meters away. Really just a concrete pillbox with sandbags stacked around it, designed for monitoring the training range rather than repelling a full-scale attack. But it was cover. It was concealment. It was better than standing in the open while the world burned around them. Donovan was already inside, working his radio with frantic intensity. His shoulder was bleeding through a hastily applied field dressing, but his hands were steady as he cycled through frequencies. Tanner was providing covering fire from a gap in the sandbags, his M4 carbine spitting controlled 3-round bursts toward the northern fence line, where enemy fighters were pouring through a breach in the perimeter wire. "Radio's down," Donovan shouted as they ducked inside. "They hit our communications tower in the first strike. We've got no contact with the command, no contact with the QRF, nothing." "How many?" Holloway asked, checking his rifle. "And at least 40, maybe 50. They're organized, Chief. This wasn't some random attack. They knew exactly where to hit us and when." "This was planned," Tanner added, without taking his eyes off his sector. "Professional job. Someone gave them our layouts, our schedules, everything." Cassidy pressed herself against the cool concrete, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was cleaning crew. Support personnel. The Geneva Convention had rules about non-combatants in situations like this. Those rules seemed very far away now. Holloway was scanning the battlefield through a gap in the sandbags, his experienced eyes, reading the chaos like a language only he could understand. Cassidy watched his jaw tighten, watched him run calculations in his head, measuring distances, counting enemies, assessing options. Whatever numbers he was coming up with, they weren't good. "Donovan, how many magazines do we have?" "Maybe 12 between the 4 of us, plus whatever's in our current weapons." Tanner: 8 frag grenades, 3 smoke, and my sidearm with 2 spare mags. Holloway nodded slowly, his expression revealing nothing. Then he turned and looked directly at Cassidy. really looked at her, like he was seeing her for the first time despite 3 months of training under her watchful eyes. "You ever fire a weapon?" he asked. Cassidy's mouth went dry. "In basic, qualified with the M16. I mean really fire, under pressure, when it mattered." She thought about deer season in Montana, thought about her father's steady hand on her shoulder, thought about cold mornings in the Bitterroot Valley when the world had been just her and him and the rifle and the perfect stillness of the hunt. "Yes," she said, "before I enlisted, a long time ago." Another mortar round hit close enough to rain dirt and debris down on their position. The sandbags absorbed most of the shrapnel, but Cassidy felt small fragments pepper her exposed skin like angry insects. Through the smoke, she could see more enemy fighters moving up using cover and fire discipline that marked them as trained infantry, not militia. Holloway grimaced and pressed a hand to his right side. When he pulled it away, his palm was dark with blood. A piece of shrapnel from the initial barrage had caught him below his body armor in the gap between his plates. The wound wasn't immediately fatal, but it was bad. Bad enough that his face had gone pale under the dust and blood. Bad enough that his hand trembled slightly when he tried to raise his rifle. "Chief, how bad?" Donovan asked, already knowing the answer. "Bad enough that I can't hold steady on a scope." The two SEALs exchanged a look. Some silent communication passed between them, the kind that came from years of operating together in situations where words were a luxury they couldn't afford. Donovan shook his head slightly, his expression tight with something between denial and resignation. But Holloway had already made his decision. He turned back to Cassidy, and she saw something in his eyes that made her blood turn cold. Not fear. Operators like Holloway didn't show fear the way normal people did. This was something else. Calculation. Assessment. The look a man gives you when he's measuring you for a role you never auditioned for. A role that might get you killed. "The MK-13, he said, gesturing toward his rifle propped against the sandbags. "You know what that is?" "Yes." "Good. Then you know what it can do." He pointed toward a low ridge approximately 600 meters to the northwest, barely visible through the smoke and dust. "There's a heavy weapons team setting up on that ridgeline. 4 men. They're assembling mortar tubes. When they're ready, they're going to drop high-explosive rounds directly into our defensive positions." Cassidy stared at him, understanding beginning to dawn with horrible clarity. "If they succeed," Holloway continued, his voice steady despite the chaos around them, "everyone in the southern compound dies. The Marines in the barracks, the medics treating wounded in the aid station, the support staff who never asked to be in a combat zone. 200 people minimum. All dead because we couldn't stop 4 men on a ridge." "I can't," Cassidy started, but Holloway cut her off. "I've watched you, Weaver." The words hit her like a physical blow. For 3 months she'd believed herself invisible, a ghost moving through the background of other people's important work. No one noticed the cleaning crew. No one paid attention to the woman collecting brass casings while warriors trained. But Holloway had noticed. "I've watched you watching us," he said, "every morning for 3 months. I've seen how you track our shooting patterns, how you check the wind flags without even thinking about it the same way I do. How your eyes follow our sight lines like you're making calculations in your head." Cassidy opened her mouth to protest, to deny it, to claim she'd just been curious. But the words wouldn't come. Because it was true. All of it was true. "You're not watching like a spectator," Holloway continued. "You're watching like a shooter, like someone who understands what we're doing because you've done it yourself. Maybe not with these weapons, maybe not in these conditions, but somewhere, sometime, someone taught you how to read a range." "My father," Cassidy whispered. "He taught me. In Montana. Before." "Before what?" "Before he died. Before everything." Holloway nodded, accepting this without further questions. There would be time for full stories later if they survived. Right now, all that mattered was the next few minutes. "I can't give you a choice," he said, his voice dropping lower, more intense. "Because there isn't one. That weapons team will be operational in about 3 minutes. We're pinned down here. Radio's dead. Reinforcements are too far away. You're the only one in this position who can make that shot." "I'm not a sniper. I'm not even a soldier, not really. I clean floors and collect brass and you're the only chance those 200 people have." He reached for the MK-13, his movements careful and deliberate despite his injury. The rifle was magnificent up close, brutal and purposeful with clean lines that spoke of precision engineering and lethal capability. The scope alone probably cost more than Cassidy made in 6 months. Holloway checked the chamber with practiced efficiency, confirming the round was seated properly. Check the magazine, check the safety. Then he held the weapon out to her. It's zeroed for 600 meters. Wind is approximately 8 miles per hour from the east. You'll need to compensate 1 mil left. Trigger pull is 3 pounds. The recoil will surprise you even if you're ready for it. Cassidy's hands were shaking as she reached for the rifle. It was heavier than she expected, even though she'd mentally cataloged its weight specifications dozens of times while watching the team train. The polymer and metal and precision engineering settled into her grip like something both completely foreign and hauntingly familiar. This wasn't a deer rifle. This wasn't a competition weapon fired at paper targets in a controlled environment with judges and timers and the comfortable knowledge that the worst consequence of missing was a lower score. This was an instrument designed for one purpose only: to end human lives. "I can't do this," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. How weak, how nothing like the woman her father had raised her to be. Holloway moved closer, closing the distance between them until his eyes were all she could see. Brown eyes flecked with gold. Eyes that had seen things she couldn't imagine. Eyes that held no judgment, no disappointment, just the absolute certainty of a man who had made his assessment and found her worthy. "Yes, you can," he said, "because if you don't, we all die. Every person on this base who hasn't already been killed. That's not pressure, Weaver. That's just fact. The only question is whether you're going to let it happen or whether you're going to do what you were born to do." "What I was born to do?" "Shoot, like your father taught you, like you've been practicing in your head for 3 months while you watched us train, like you've been waiting your whole life for a moment exactly like this one." Donovan had stopped working the dead radio. Tanner had glanced back from his firing position, his expression unreadable, but his attention focused on the exchange happening behind him. They were watching, waiting, trusting their chief's judgment about a woman they'd never spoken to, never trained with, never even acknowledged existed. Cassidy looked down at the rifle in her hands, at the scope that would bring distant targets into crystal clarity, at the trigger that would send a bullet screaming across 600 meters of Afghan desert to find its mark, or miss entirely and doom everyone she'd just been trying to survive alongside. "Get into position," Holloway said. It wasn't a request, and somehow impossibly Cassidy's body began to muscle memory from a lifetime ago took over. Movements she hadn't practiced in a decade rose up from somewhere deep inside her as natural as breathing. She went prone, settling onto the packed dirt behind the sandbag wall. The rifle came up to her shoulder, the stock fitting against her cheek with the intimate familiarity of an old lover. The scope came to her eye, and the world narrowed down to circles and crosshairs and distant figures who had no idea death was looking at them through German optics. She could see them now. The weapons team on the ridge. 4 men working with the efficiency of trained soldiers, assembling mortar tubes, arranging ammunition, preparing to rain destruction down on the compound below. They were 600 meters away, give or take. Through the 25-power magnification of the Schmidt and Bender scope, she could see individual faces, individual movements. The team leader checking his watch, probably timing their setup against some predetermined schedule. In another life, that man might have been someone's father, someone's husband, someone's son. Cassidy pushed the thought aside. Holloway lowered himself down beside her with a grunt of pain that he couldn't quite suppress. Blood was soaking through his uniform, now spreading in a dark stain across his right side. But his voice was steady as he settled into the spotter position, bringing his binoculars up to scan the target area. "Breathe," he said. "In through the nose, out through the mouth. Let your heart rate come down." Cassidy tried. Her pulse was hammering at what felt like 200 beats per minute. How was she supposed to make a precision shot like this? How was she supposed to be the steady, calm instrument that sniper work required when every cell in her body was screaming with terror and adrenaline? "Winds holding at 8 miles per hour from the east. That's 1 mil left adjustment. You see that turret on the top of your scope?" "Yes." 3 clicks counterclockwise. "Do it now." Her fingers found the windage dial, made the adjustment. The crosshairs shifted slightly in the scope, accounting for the push of the wind against her bullet's flight path. Range is 600 meters. The rifle's already zeroed for that distance, so no elevation adjustment needed. Find the team leader. He's the one on the left, the one checking his watch. Cassidy moved the rifle fractionally, bringing the crosshairs to rest on a human being. 40 years old, maybe. Bearded, wearing mixed military gear that suggested experience and resources. He was focused on his work, confident in the protection of distance and chaos, never imagining that a woman he'd never met was watching him through a sniper scope. Don't think about who he is, Holloway said, reading her hesitation somehow. Think about who he's about to kill. Think about the medics in that aid station who joined the army to save lives. Think about the Marines sleeping off night shift in those barracks. Think about the cooks and clerks and mechanics who never signed up for combat. Think about everyone who dies if you don't take this shot. Cassidy's finger found the trigger. 3 pounds of pressure. That's all it would take. 3 pounds of force applied to a curved piece of metal in a man 600 meters away would cease to exist. Her father's voice echoed across the years. A sniper shoots with their heartbeat, not their eyes. Cassidy slowed her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The world contracted down to the space between heartbeats, to that perfect stillness between one breath and the next, where the body was absolutely motionless and the mind was absolutely clear. She found it, that place her father had spoken about, the place between heartbeats where time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, where the chaos of the battlefield faded to nothing, and all that existed was the shooter and the rifle and the target and the impossibly thin thread connecting them across 600 meters of space. Her crosshairs settled on the team leader's center mass. On scope, she whispered. Send it, Holloway replied. Cassidy squeezed the trigger. The shot surprised her just like her father had taught her it should. The MK-13 roared and kicked against her shoulder with more force than she'd anticipated, driving her body backward against the dirt. The scope lifted from her eye for a fraction of a second, breaking her sight picture. When she found the target again, he was down. The team leader lay motionless on the ridge, his body crumpled in that unmistakable way that spoke of instantaneous death. The other 3 members of the weapons team were frozen in place, their hands still holding components of the mortar they'd been assembling, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. One of them started to turn, searching for the source of the shot that had killed their leader. Reload, Donovan's voice came from somewhere behind her. You've got 4 more rounds in the magazine. Make them count. Cassidy's hands were steadier now. Moving with an efficiency that surprised her, she worked the bolt action, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a fresh round. The brass clinked against the concrete beside her, hot and smoking, one more casing for someone to collect when this was over. The first shot had been instinct, muscle memory and desperation combining into something that approached competence. The next shots would determine whether she was a shooter or just someone who'd made one impossible shot under impossible circumstances. The enemy was reacting now. The remaining mortar team members were scrambling for cover, abandoning their half-assembled weapon in their rush to escape. But they were exposed on that ridge, caught in the open by an attack they'd never anticipated. Cassidy found the second target in her scope. A man dragging one of the mortar tubes toward a depression in the ground, trying to save the weapon even as he fled for his life. 600 meters, 8-mile-per-hour wind. She made the adjustments automatically, her mind and body working together in a harmony she'd almost forgotten she was capable of. The crosshairs settled, her breathing slowed. She found the space between heartbeats. The second shot was cleaner than the first. The man dropped the mortar tube and collapsed beside it, his body going limp before he hit the ground. Good hit, Holloway confirmed. 2 down, 2 to go. The remaining enemy fighters were running now, abandoning any pretense of completing their mission in favor of simple survival. Smart, but not smart enough. They were still on that exposed ridge, still within range, still visible through the Schmidt and Bender scope. Cassidy tracked the third man, leading him slightly as he sprinted toward the far side of the ridge. Her father had taught her about leading moving targets during those long-ago hunting trips. How to calculate the time between trigger pull and impact. How to place the crosshairs not where the target was, but where it would be. She squeezed the trigger. The man stumbled and went down, tumbling across the rusty ground before coming to rest against a boulder. The fourth fighter was almost to cover when her final shot caught him. He'd been faster than the others, and for a moment Cassidy thought she'd missed. Then he pitched forward, disappearing behind the ridgeline. 4 shots, 4 targets. The mortar position was neutralized. Somewhere in the compound, someone was cheering. Other defenders had seen what happened, had watched an enemy weapons team get systematically eliminated by precision fire from a position they couldn't even identify. The cheering spread voices, rising above the sounds of ongoing combat, celebrating a victory they didn't understand. Cassidy felt none of it. No triumph, no relief, no horror. Just a strange, floating calm, like she'd stepped outside her own body and was watching someone else do these things. Someone who knew how to kill at distance. Someone who had been waiting inside her all along, patient and cold and terrifyingly capable. Someone she'd never wanted to meet. "Enemy sniper," Holloway said sharply, his binoculars swinging to a new position. 10 o'clock, approximately 700 meters, in those rocks. Cassidy started to turn, started to acquire the new target, but Holloway's hand clamped down on her shoulder with surprising strength. "Don't move. He's already got our position. If you show yourself, you're dead." As if to prove his point, a round cracked past their position, close enough that Cassidy felt the displacement of air against her cheek. The sandbag, inches from her head, exploded, showering her with sand and fragments. Someone on the other side of this battlefield knew exactly where she was, and he was very, very good at his job. Cassidy pressed herself flat against the dirt, her heart hammering again, the calm of the shooting trance shattered by the immediate reality of being hunted. "That's Viper," Donovan said grimly. "Taliban sniper, 47 confirmed kills. No one's ever survived a direct engagement with him." Cassidy looked at Holloway, hoping to see some plan forming behind those steady brown eyes. Some trick or tactic that would get them out of this impossible situation. What she saw instead was assessment, calculation, and something that looked almost like pride. "Well, Weaver," he said quietly, "looks like you're about to find out exactly what you're capable of." Another round slammed into the concrete inches from her position. The real test was just beginning. The bullet crater in the concrete was still smoking when Cassidy pressed her cheek against the dirt and tried to make herself as small as possible. 700 meters away, somewhere in that boulder field on the eastern ridge, a man called Viper was adjusting his scope for another shot. She couldn't see him, couldn't identify his exact position, but she could feel his presence like a weight pressing down on her chest, the certain knowledge that someone out there was looking at her through crosshairs and waiting for her to make a mistake. One mistake. That's all it would take. Holloway had gone still beside her, his binoculars lowered, his breathing shallow and controlled despite the blood still seeping from his wound. Donovan was flat against the back wall of the pillbox, his radio abandoned, his rifle up and ready, but useless against a target he couldn't see. Tanner had stopped firing toward the breach in the perimeter, his attention divided between the fighters still pushing through the wire and the sniper who had them pinned. 4 people trapped in a concrete box while the base burned around them. And somewhere out there, 47 confirmed kills were about to become 48. "He's good," Holloway said quietly, his voice barely audible above the distant sounds of combat. "Better than good. We've been hunting him for 2 years. Every time we get close, he disappears. Every time we think we have him cornered, he kills someone and vanishes." "Then how do we beat him?" Cassidy asked. "We don't. Not in a strict fight. He's got better position, better cover, and more experience than everyone in this pillbox combined." Another round slammed into the sandbags, showering them with debris. Viper was probing their defenses, testing angles, looking for gaps in their cover. Sooner or later, he would find one. "So what do we do?" Holloway was silent for a moment, his eyes distant, calculating. Cassidy recognized that look now. She'd seen it on her father's face during difficult hunts, when the terrain was wrong and the wind was shifting and the shot seemed impossible. It was the look of someone running through scenarios in their head, discarding options, searching for the one path that led to survival. "We make him move," Holloway said finally. "He's got the advantage because he's in a static position with good cover. If we can force him to relocate, he'll be vulnerable. Just for a moment, maybe 2 or 3 seconds. And then you kill him." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Cassidy had just killed 4 men on that ridge, 4 human beings who had been alive and breathing and thinking about whatever soldiers think about before they die. She'd done it from 600 meters away through a scope that made them seem close enough to touch. This was different. This was personal. Viper wasn't an anonymous target setting up a mortar position. He was a predator, a hunter, someone who had chosen this life deliberately and excelled at it beyond anyone's expectations. 47 kills meant 47 families who had received the worst news of their lives. 47 soldiers who had trusted their training and their equipment and their comrades, and it hadn't been enough. And now he was hunting her. "I can't match him," Cassidy said. "You just told me he's better than everyone here. I'm not even a real shooter. I'm a cleaning crew member who got lucky 4 times." Luck had nothing to do with it. Holloway shifted position, slightly wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "I've watched a lot of shooters in my career, Weaver. Trained some of the best. I know what raw talent looks like, and I know what hard work looks like, and I know what happens when you combine them both. I haven't shot a rifle in 10 years. Your body remembers. I saw it when you took those shots. The breathing, the trigger, control, the follow-through. That's not something you learn in a few minutes of instruction. That's muscle memory built over years of practice." Another round cracked past closer this time. Viper was getting their range dialed in. They had minutes at most before he found an angle that would turn this concrete box into a killing ground. "Here's what's going to happen," Holloway said, his voice taking on the flat, commanding tone of a man who had led soldiers through impossible situations before. "Tanner is going to throw smoke grenades to obscure our position. While the smoke is building, Donovan is going to use a signal mirror to create a false target about 20 meters to our right." Cassidy listened, her mind racing to keep up with the tactical implications. "Viper will see the flash and engage the false position. That's when you move. You'll have a narrow window, maybe 3 seconds, when he's focused on confirming his kill. In those 3 seconds, you need to acquire him, adjust for the new range and wind conditions, and fire." 700 meters, Cassidy said. "That's 100 meters further than my last shots. The scope has holdover marks for range estimation. You've watched us train for 3 months. You know how to use them." She did know. She'd watched Holloway and Donovan run through the calculations dozens of times, adjusting for range and wind and angle. She'd mentally practiced alongside them, following their adjustments through the scope in her imagination, learning the relationship between distance and holdover without ever touching the rifle. But knowing and doing are very different things. "What if I miss?" Holloway met her eyes. "Then we all die. But you're not going to miss." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've been watching you for 3 months, remember? I've seen the way you calculate wind speed without even thinking about it. I've seen the way you track our shots and predict where they'll land before they get there. I've seen you mouth the holdover adjustments to yourself while you're supposed to be collecting brass." Cassidy felt heat rise to her cheeks. She thought she was being subtle. She thought no one had noticed her silent participation in their training sessions. "You're not a cleaning crew member who got lucky," Holloway continued. "You're a shooter who's been hiding from herself for 10 years. And right now I need you to stop hiding." The words cut through something deep inside her, a wall she'd built brick by brick since the day her parents died. A wall that had protected her from hope and ambition in the terrible vulnerability of wanting something she might not be able to have. Her father had believed in her, had seen something in her that went beyond simple talent, beyond the mechanics of marksmanship, to something essential in her nature. He'd told her once that some people were born to shoot, that it was in their blood, in their bones, in the way they saw the world, in their place in it. She'd buried that part of herself when she buried him, but it hadn't died. It had just been waiting. "Okay," she said, "tell me what to do." The next few minutes were a blur of whispered instructions and careful preparations. Tanner positioned himself near the edge of their cover smoke, grenades ready. Donovan produced a small signal mirror from his kit, the kind used for emergency signaling, and found an angle where he could create a convincing flash without exposing himself to direct fire. Cassidy checked the MK-13's magazine. 4 rounds remaining. She would need to make every shot count. Holloway walked her through the engagement sequence one more time. The smoke would provide concealment for approximately 30 seconds before the wind dispersed it. During that window, she would need to relocate to a new firing position, acquire Viper when he revealed himself, and take the shot. One shot. One chance. If she missed, there wouldn't be time for a second attempt. Remember, Holloway said he's going to move fast once he realizes the mirror flash was a decoy. You'll have 3 seconds at most. Don't think. Don't hesitate. Trust your training. I don't have training, not for this. Then trust your instincts. Trust your father. Trust whatever it was that let you put 4 rounds into 4 targets at 600 meters without missing once. Cassidy nodded, not trusting her voice. Her hands were trembling slightly as she gripped the rifle, but her breathing was steady. In through the nose, out through the mouth, finding that quiet place between heartbeats where the chaos of the world couldn't reach her. Ready? Holloway asked. Ready. Tanner. Smoke. 2 grenades arced through the air, landing in the open ground between their position and the boulder field. Purple smoke began to billow upward, thick and opaque, creating a wall of obscuration that would hide their movements from Viper's scope. Donovan. Mirror. A flash of reflected sunlight stabbed through the smoke, creating a bright point of light approximately 20 meters to their right. Once, twice, 3 times. It was exactly the kind of signal that a panicked soldier might make while trying to communicate with distant friendlies. Exactly the kind of target that a sniper couldn't resist. The response was immediate. A round cracked through the air, punching into the ground near the false position. Then another. Viper was engaging, committing to the target, his attention focused on confirming the kill. Now, Holloway hissed. Move. Cassidy rolled to her right, coming up in a new position behind a different section of the sandbag wall. The smoke was thick around her, acrid and chemical smelling, but through gaps in the purple haze she could see the boulder field. And she could see him. Viper had shifted position to get a better angle on the false target, exposing himself for just a moment as he leaned out from behind his rocky cover. He was exactly where Holloway had predicted he would be, his Dragunov SVD rifle tracking toward the point where the mirror flashes had originated. 700 meters. The wind had shifted while they were planning, coming from the north now instead of the east. Stronger than before, maybe 10 or 12 miles per hour. Cassidy made the adjustment automatically, her fingers finding the windage turret and clicking it to compensate. Through the scope, Viper's face came into sharp focus. Weathered features, dark beard, eyes that held the flat, calculating look of a professional killer. He was maybe 40 years old, experienced and confident, certain of his superiority over whoever had been foolish enough to challenge him. He didn't know she was watching, didn't know that the hunter had become the hunted. Cassidy found her breath, found her heartbeat, found that perfect stillness between one moment and the next. Her finger touched the trigger. 3 pounds of pressure. The Mk-13 roared, and 700 meters away, the legend of Viper came to an end. She saw him jerk backward through the scope, his body twisting with the impact, before disappearing behind the rocks. No movement, no attempt to recover or return fire. Just the sudden, absolute stillness of death. Hit, Donovan confirmed, his binoculars trained on the boulder field. Center mass. He's down. Cassidy lowered the rifle for just a moment, her arms trembling with the aftershock of adrenaline. 5 men dead in 15 minutes. But there was no time to process what she'd done. The enemy assault was adapting. Without Viper providing overwatch, the attackers had lost their precision advantage. But they still had numbers, and desperation made men dangerous. Multiple contacts, Donovan called out, scanning the battlefield. They're pushing everywhere at once. Cassidy found herself falling into a rhythm she didn't know she possessed. Holloway fed her targets despite his wound. Donovan called wind adjustments. Tanner kept close threats at bay with his carbine. And she shot. A machine gun team setting up near the burning motor pool. 2 rounds, 2 kills. The gunner first, then his assistant before he could take over the weapon. A group of fighters attempting to flank the medical station from the east. She dropped 3 of them in rapid succession, the others scattering for cover they would never reach. Insurgents probing the eastern fence line, testing for weak points. 4 more eliminated before they could find one. More targets, more adjustments, more triggers pulled in that cold space between heartbeats. She stopped counting after the 12th additional kill. The numbers had ceased to mean anything. There was only the scope, the crosshairs, the mathematics of wind and distance, and the absolute necessity of protecting the people behind her. Donovan pressed a fresh magazine into her hands, the 3rd one Holloway had produced from his kit. She chambered around without conscious thought, her body operating on autopilot, while her mind floated somewhere above the chaos. 18 kills now. 18 human beings who had been alive an hour ago. Good shooting, Holloway said quietly, his voice strained with pain but steady with approval. You're keeping them off balance. They can't coordinate with a sniper, picking apart every squad that tries to advance. Before Cassidy could respond, the crack of gunfire from the southern perimeter intensified. Respect, maybe, or recognition, the acknowledgement of one shooter to another. That was 700 meters with a shifting wind in a 3-second window. Most trained snipers couldn't make that shot. I had to, Cassidy said. There wasn't any other choice. There's always a choice. You chose to fight. You chose to be the person we needed you to be. Before Cassidy could respond, the crack of gunfire from the southern perimeter intensified. Tanner swore and swung his rifle toward the new threat, his M4 spitting 3-round bursts at enemy fighters who were pushing through a gap in the defensive line. They're making a run for the south gate, Donovan reported, scanning the battlefield. RPG teams, at least 4 of them. If they breach that gate, they'll have a straight shot into the compound center. Cassidy looked where he was pointing. She could see them now, enemy fighters moving in coordinated teams using cover and suppressive fire to advance toward the main entrance to the base. Each team carried the distinctive tube of a rocket-propelled grenade launcher weapons capable of blowing through the reinforced gate and opening the compound to full assault. 200 meters away, then 180, then 160. They were going to reach the gate. Weaver, Holloway's voice was strained, his wound taking its toll despite his attempts to hide it. Those RPG teams, can you stop them? Cassidy checked the MK-13. Fresh magazine, 5 rounds. Donovan had resupplied her during the last engagement. 4 RPG teams meant 8 fighters minimum, but she only needed to stop the launchers. 4 precise shots to save 200 lives. This wasn't like the mortar team on the ridge. Those men had been stationary, exposed, unaware of the threat. These fighters knew they were under fire. They were trained, disciplined, and absolutely committed to their mission. I can try, she said. Then try, because if those gates come down, nothing else we've wanted today matters. Cassidy settled back into firing position, her body finding the familiar posture with an ease that still surprised her. The scope came up to her eye, and the world narrowed down to circles and crosshairs, and the lethal mathematics of trajectory and wind. The first RPG team was 140 meters out now, moving fast toward the gate. 2 men, one carrying the launcher, the other providing cover fire with an AK-47. They were using the burned hulk of a supply truck for concealment, advancing in short rushes that minimized their exposure. Cassidy tracked the man with the launcher. He was young, maybe 25, moving with the desperate energy of someone who believed in what he was doing. In another life, under different circumstances, he might have been a farmer or a teacher or a father. She pushed the thought aside and focused on the mathematics. 140 meters, wind from the north at 12 miles per hour, moving target approximately 6 miles per hour lateral speed. Her father had taught her to lead moving targets during deer season. How to calculate the time between trigger pull and impact, adjusting the point of aim to intersect with the target's path. The principle was the same whether you were shooting at a buck in the Bitterroot Valley or a man in the Afghan desert. She led him by 2 feet and squeezed the trigger. The round caught him mid-stride, spinning him around and dropping him to the dirt. The RPG launcher clattered away from his suddenly limp fingers, unfired and harmless. His partner froze for just a moment, shock overriding training. That moment cost him his life as Tanner's M4 found him with a 3-round burst. 2 down, 3 teams remaining, but now they knew she was here, knew approximately where the sniper fire was coming from. The remaining fighters adjusted their approach, using buildings and vehicles and any available cover to shield themselves from her line of sight. The second team made their move while Cassidy was still tracking, sprinting from behind a concrete barrier toward the gate. The man with the launcher was fast covering the ground in a dead run, presenting only a narrow silhouette as he moved. 120 meters, moving fast, wind pushing him toward her line of fire. Cassidy calculated, adjusted, fired. The round caught him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways but not dropping him. He stumbled, recovered, kept moving toward the gate with the launcher still gripped in his hands. Wounded but not stopped. She worked the bolt, chambering her last round. The ejected casing clinked against the concrete, hot and smoking, and Cassidy realized with cold clarity that this was it. 1 round remaining. 3 hostile fighters still advancing. I'm out after this, she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Make it count, Holloway replied. The wounded fighter had reached the gate. He was kneeling now, trying to steady the RPG launcher against his injured shoulder. His movements clumsy with pain, but driven by desperate determination. Behind him, his partner was providing cover fire, keeping the defenders' heads down while the launcher was prepared. Cassidy found him in her scope, 80 meters now, close enough that she could see the blood soaking through his sleeve, the grimace of pain on his face, the absolute commitment in his eyes as he lined up the shot that would blow the gate apart. This wasn't about win calculations or holdover adjustments. This was about ending a threat before it could end everyone she was trying to protect. She put the crosshairs on his chest and pulled the trigger. The MK-13's final shot was clean and precise. The fighter collapsed over his unfired launcher, his body going limp, the threat neutralized in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Good kill, Donovan called out. 2 more teams, but they're pulling back. They've lost too many men. They're breaking off the assault. Through her scope, Cassidy watched the remaining fighters retreat, dragging their wounded with them, abandoning their advance on the gate. The defenders were rallying now, coordinated fire, pushing the enemy back toward the breach in the perimeter. And in the distance, growing louder with each passing second, came the most beautiful sound Cassidy had ever heard. The distinctive thump, thump, thump of approaching Black Hawk helicopters. The cavalry had arrived. The next 30 minutes were chaos of a different kind. Apache gunships swept across the battlefield, their 30mm chain guns tearing into enemy positions with devastating precision. Black Hawks disgorged fresh troops who pushed the remaining attackers back through the breach and into the desert beyond. The enemy assault broke, turning into a rout, then a desperate retreat. And through it all, Cassidy stayed at her position, behind the sandbags, the empty MK-13 cradled in her arms, watching the battle's conclusion through eyes that felt like they belonged to someone else. Holloway was being treated by a medic, now his wound cleaned and bandaged, while he refused evacuation until he was certain the base was secure. Donovan had taken over coordination with the arriving forces, his radio somehow working again, now that the jamming had ceased. Tanner was helping to establish a defensive perimeter, his massive frame a reassuring presence among the shell-shock survivors. They had held, against all odds, against an enemy that had known exactly where to strike and when they had held. But the victory felt hollow in Cassidy's chest. She looked down at her hands. They were scraped and bruised from being thrown against concrete during the initial barrage. Dirt was caked under her fingernails. A thin line of dried blood traced down her left forearm from a cut she didn't remember receiving. These hands had killed today. Not theoretically, not distantly, not through the comfortable abstraction of bombs dropped from 30,000 feet. She had looked at human beings through a scope, made the conscious decision to end their lives, and pulled the trigger. 23 times, counting the mortar team, the enemy fighters advancing on the gate, and Viper himself. 23 human beings who had been alive this morning and were now dead because of her. Hey! Cassidy looked up to find Holloway standing over her, his right side heavily bandaged, his face pale, but his eyes clear. How you holding up? It was such a simple question, such a normal thing to ask, and Cassidy found that she had no idea how to answer it. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel. There's no supposed to, Holloway replied, lowering himself carefully to sit beside her against the sandbag wall. Every shooter processes it differently. Some feel nothing at first and fall apart later. Some feel everything immediately and go numb. Some never process it at all and spend the rest of their lives running from what they did. What about you? How do you process it? Holloway was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant, looking at something Cassidy couldn't see. I think about the people I saved, he said finally. Not the people I killed. I think about the soldiers who went home to their families because I did my job. I think about the missions that succeeded because the enemy never saw me coming. I think about the math, the cold calculation that says one life taken to save 10 lives is a trade worth making. Is that enough? Does that make it easier? No, nothing makes it easier, but it makes it bearable. It gives you a reason to get up the next morning and do it again if you have to. Cassidy looked at the rifle still cradled in her arms. The MK-13 felt different now than it had when Holloway first placed it in her hands. Heavier, somehow weighted with the lights it had taken under her direction. I killed 23 people today, she said quietly. I killed them, and I didn't hesitate. I didn't freeze. I just did it, one after another, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That's because it was. She looked at him sharply, startled by his words. Not killing, Holloway clarified. Not the taking of life. That's never natural, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying or broken. But the shooting itself, the mechanics, the focus, the absolute clarity of purpose. That was natural for you because you were born to do it. I was born to clean brass casings and mop floors. No, you were assigned to clean brass casings and mop floors. There's a difference. What you were born to do, what your father trained you to do, what's been sleeping inside you for 10 years waiting for exactly this moment. That's something else entirely. A medic appeared checking on Holloway's bandages, and the conversation paused. Cassidy used the moment to look around at the aftermath of the battle. Smoke still rose from a dozen burning vehicles and buildings. Soldiers moved through the compound in organized patterns, treating wounded, establishing security, beginning the grim work of counting the dead. She had helped save this place. All of these people, the medics and cooks and mechanics and clerks, who had never expected to be in a combat zone, were still alive because she had picked up a rifle and done what needed to be done. 23 lives taken to save 200. The math made sense when you looked at it that way. Cold and clinical and absolutely logical. But math didn't account for the faces she'd seen through the scope. The individuals who had been reduced to statistics in the ledger of war. Chief Holloway, a young sergeant, approached looking exhausted but relieved. Colonel Ashford wants to see you in the command center. He's asking about the sniper who took out the mortar team and eliminated Viper. Holloway glanced at Cassidy, a slight smile crossing his weathered features. Tell the colonel I'll be there shortly, and tell him to add another name to that list. The sniper he's asking about is sitting right here. The sergeant looked at Cassidy with new eyes, taking in her cleaning crew uniform, her dust-covered face, the empty rifle still resting across her lap. His expression shifted through confusion, doubt, and finally something like awe. You're the one who made those shots, he asked. Cassidy nodded, not trusting her voice. 23 confirmed kills in a single engagement, Holloway said, including the most wanted sniper in the region. Not bad for someone who wasn't supposed to pick up a weapon today. The sergeant saluted sharp and formal, the kind of salute reserved for warriors who had proven themselves in combat. Then he turned and jogged back toward the command center, presumably to deliver news that would change the way everyone on this base looked at the quiet woman who collected their brass casings. Cassidy watched him go, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her like a blanket. 3 months of invisibility erased in a single morning of violence and precision. 3 months of hiding from herself ended by the simple necessity of survival. What happens now? She asked. Now you have a choice, Holloway replied. You can go back to being invisible. Turn in the rifle, return to your cleaning duties, pretend today never happened. No one would blame you. What you went through, what you did, that's not something anyone expects from support personnel. Or you become who you were always meant to be. He reached into his pocket and produced a small object, pressing it into her palm. Cassidy looked down at it, a brass challenge coin, bearing the trident insignia of Naval Special Warfare. That's not an official offer, Holloway said. That comes later through proper channels with paperwork and evaluations and all the bureaucratic nonsense that the military loves. But it's a promise that if you want to pursue this path, I'll make sure you get the chance. Cassidy turned the coin over in her fingers, feeling its weight, its significance. This small piece of brass represented everything she'd given up when her parents died. The dreams she'd buried, the potential she'd abandoned, the woman she'd been too afraid to become. I need to think about it, she said. Take all the time you need. But while you're thinking, remember something. Holloway pushed himself to his feet, groaning slightly at the pain from his wound. What you did today wasn't luck. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't even survival instinct. It was skill, pure and simple. Skill that someone took a long time to develop in you, and skill that you've spent a decade pretending you don't have. He started to walk away, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. Your father would be pricked of you, Weaver. I never knew him, but I know shooters. And the person who taught you to shoot like that, the person who built that foundation in you, he would look at what you did today and know that his daughter became exactly who he raised her to be. Cassidy watched him go, the challenge coin warm in her palm, the empty rifle heavy across her lap and the weight of 23 souls pressing down on her chest. Around her, the base slowly returned to something like normal. Fires were extinguished. Wounded were evacuated. The dead were collected and covered with dignity and respect. Life continued as it always did in the spaces between violence and peace. But Cassidy remained where she was, sitting against the sandbag wall, watching the smoke rise into the Afghan sky and thinking about her father, about cold mornings in Montana and the patient way he'd taught her to breathe, about the sound of his voice telling her that some people were born to shoot, about all the years she'd spent running from that truth, hiding in plain sight, pretending to be someone smaller than she really was. 23 people were dead because of her. 200 people were alive because of her. And somewhere in between those numbers, somewhere in the space between killer and savior, was the woman she was going to have to decide to become. The sun began to set over the Afghan mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded her of autumn in the Bitterroot Valley. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter lifted off, carrying wounded to better medical facilities. Cassidy closed her eyes and let herself remember her father's face one more time. Then she stood up, tucked the challenge coin into her pocket, and began walking toward the command center. Whatever came next, she was done being invisible. The command center was a controlled chaos of radio chatter and urgent voices when Cassidy stepped through the door. Officers hunched over maps spread across folding tables. Enlisted personnel ran between stations carrying reports and updates. The air smelled of coffee and sweat, and the particular tension that came from people trying to restore order after catastrophe. Colonel Richard Ashford stood at the center of it all, a tall man with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from oak over 55 years of hard living. 30 years of military service had given him the kind of presence that made rooms fall quiet when he entered. He was listening to a report from his intelligence officer, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Cassidy hesitated at the entrance, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked. Her uniform was torn and covered in dust. Blood had dried in a thin line down her left temple. She was still carrying the empty MK-13, though she wasn't sure why she hadn't turned it in yet. A cleaning crew member standing in a room full of officers and senior NCOs. She might as well have been a ghost who had wandered into the wrong afterlife. Then Ashford looked up and saw her. His eyes moved from her face to the rifle in her hands to the state of her uniform. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition that told Cassidy he already knew who she was and what she had done. "You're Weaver," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Chief Holloway's report came in 10 minutes ago. He says you're the one who neutralized the mortar team and eliminated the hostile sniper designated Viper." Ashford paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. "He also says you're assigned to the cleaning crew." "Yes, sir." The colonel was silent for a long moment, his eyes studying her with the kind of intensity that made Cassidy want to look away. She held his gaze instead, drawing on reserves of composure she hadn't known she possessed. 23 confirmed kills in a single engagement," Ashford said finally, "including a high-value target that our best operators have been hunting for 2 years, in a weapon system you'd never fired before today." Cassidy nodded, not trusting her voice. Ashford turned to his aide. "Clear the room. Everyone out except Sergeant Major Collins and Chief Holloway when he arrives." The command center emptied in less than a minute, officers and enlisted personnel filing out with curious glances at the dust-covered woman who had somehow become the center of their commander's attention. When the door closed behind the last of them, the silence felt almost physical. "Sit down, Weaver." Cassidy sat in a folding chair, across from the colonel's makeshift desk, the MK-13 resting across her knees. Her hands were trembling, slightly, though whether from exhaustion or adrenaline, or something else entirely, she couldn't say. "I'm going to ask you some questions," Ashford said, his voice losing some of its command edge. "And I need you to answer them honestly. Not what you think I want to hear. Not what you think will keep you out of trouble. The truth." "Yes, sir." "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" The question opened a door that Cassidy had kept locked for a decade. She felt the memories pushing against it, demanding release, and for the first time in years, she let them through. "My father," she said quietly, "Thomas Weaver. He was a hunter in Montana, started teaching me when I was 12 years old. Hunting's one thing. What you did today goes beyond hunting. He was more than a hunter." Cassidy paused, organizing thoughts she'd never spoken aloud to anyone. "He competed in long-range shooting competitions, won a few regional championships. He believed that marksmanship was a discipline like martial arts or music, something you practiced every day, not just when you had a target in front of you. Ashford nodded slowly. Go on. He taught me everything: ballistics, wind reading, trigger control, the mental discipline required to make a precision shot under pressure. By the time I was 16, I was competing at the state level. My coach talked about Olympic prospects. What happened? The words caught in Cassidy's throat. Even after 10 years, the memory still had edges sharp enough to cut. Car accident, Highway 93 just north of Missoula. 12-car pileup in a winter storm. My parents were in the third car. They died on impact. Ashford's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I'm sorry. I was 17, 8 months from legal adulthood. The state put me in foster care. My shooting coach tried to keep me in the program, but the foster family was in Helena, 2 hours from the range where I trained. No transportation, no support. The dream just kind of died. So you enlisted. The recruiter promised opportunities in marksmanship programs, said my background would fast-track me into specialized training. Cassidy's voice carried a note of bitterness she couldn't quite suppress. Needs of the service had other plans. 8 years collecting brass casings. Yes, sir. Ashford was quiet for a moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, warmer, more personal. I've been in this man's army for 30 years, Weaver. I've seen heroes and cowards and everything in between. I've watched men crumble under pressure and watched others rise to meet impossible challenges. What I witnessed in Holloway's report, what happened on that range today, ranks among the most impressive displays of individual performance I've ever encountered. Cassidy didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. 23 kills, 4 of them from a static mortar team at 600 meters, 18 more from moving targets advancing on our perimeter, and 1, the most important one, from a hostile sniper at 700 meters who had our position pinned and was systematically eliminating our options. I did what I had to do, sir. No. Ashford leaned forward, his eyes intense. You did what almost no one else on this base could have done. You did what trained operators spend years learning to do. And you did it with a weapon you'd never fired in conditions you'd never experienced, against enemies who wanted nothing more than to kill everyone you were trying to protect. The door opened and Holloway entered. His uniform had been changed and his wound had been properly dressed, but he still moved with the careful deliberation of a man in pain. He nodded to Ashford and took a position against the wall, his presence a silent reinforcement of whatever was about to happen. Chief Holloway has recommended you for commendation, Ashford continued. He's also made a more significant recommendation, one that would require approval from several levels above my pay grade. Cassidy looked at Holloway, who gave her a slight nod of encouragement. What kind of recommendation, sir? The SEAL Sniper Training Program has a slot opening up next month. It's an 18-week course designed to transform already skilled shooters into precision marksmen capable of operating in the most demanding environments on Earth. Candidates are typically drawn from combat units with extensive field experience. Ashford paused, letting the implications sink in. No one from a support battalion has ever been accepted into the program. No woman has ever completed it. Chief Holloway believes you could be the first on both counts. The words hit Cassidy like a physical blow. The SEAL Sniper Program, the most elite marksmanship training in the American military, a path so far beyond anything she'd ever imagined that it seemed almost absurd to consider. Sir, I'm not sure I'm qualified. Neither am I, Ashford admitted. That's why I'm not making the recommendation official yet. But I am going to do something else first. He reached into a drawer and produced a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the desk toward Cassidy. This is a citation for the Silver Star. I'm putting you in for it based on your actions today. It will take months to work through the approval process, but when it does, you'll have formal recognition of what you accomplished. Cassidy stared at the paper, unable to process what she was seeing. The Silver Star, the third highest combat decoration in the United States military, awarded to soldiers who displayed gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. I was just trying to survive, she said. You were trying to protect this base and everyone on it. You succeeded beyond any reasonable expectation. That's not survival, Weaver. That's heroism. The door opened again and Sergeant Major Collins entered with another man in tow. Cassidy recognized him instantly, though she'd never spoken to him directly. Sergeant Pete Dalton, her immediate supervisor in the cleaning crew. The man who had spent 3 months making her life miserable with petty assignments and demeaning comments. Dalton's face went pale when he saw Cassidy sitting across from the colonel. Sergeant Dalton, Ashford said, his voice taking on a harder edge. You're this soldier's direct supervisor, correct? Yes, sir. Tell me about her performance over the past 3 months. Dalton's eyes flickered nervously between the colonel and Cassidy. She's been adequate, sir. Completes her assigned tasks, doesn't cause problems. Adequate, Ashford repeated the word like it tasted bad. And what was your assessment of her potential? Her capabilities, her possible contribution to operations beyond cleaning duties? Sir, she's support personnel. Her capabilities are limited to her assigned role. Her assigned role. Ashford stood his full height, emphasizing the authority in his voice. Let me tell you about her actual capabilities, Sergeant. This woman, the support personnel with limited capabilities, just saved 200 lives. She eliminated a 4-man mortar team that was about to destroy our medical facilities. She neutralized a hostile sniper who had 47 confirmed kills and was moments away from turning our defensive position into a shooting gallery. She protected our southern gate against an RPG assault that would have breached our perimeter and resulted in catastrophic casualties. Dalton's face had gone from pale to ashen. Sir, I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't look. You didn't ask. You didn't take 5 minutes to read her service record or notice that she had competitive shooting experience, or wonder why someone with her background was collecting brass casings instead of contributing to base security. Cassidy watched this exchange with a mixture of satisfaction and discomfort. She had imagined this moment, fantasized about it during the long months of Dalton's casual cruelty. But now that it was happening, she found that the victory felt hollow. Sergeant Dalton, Ashford continued, I want you to stand at attention and render a proper salute to this soldier. Dalton's face twisted with something between humiliation and anger, but he had no choice. He snapped to attention, his hand coming up to his brow in a textbook salute. Specialist Weaver saved your life today, Ashford said, along with every other person on this base who is still breathing. I want you to remember that the next time you're tempted to dismiss someone based on their assignment rather than their potential. Cassidy returned the salute, holding Dalton's gaze without flinching. Whatever satisfaction she might have expected from this moment was overwhelmed by exhaustion and the weight of everything else pressing down on her. Dismissed, Sergeant. Dalton dropped his salute and left the room without looking back. The door closed behind him with a soft click that seemed louder than it should have been. That was for you, Ashford said, settling back into his chair. But also for him, and for everyone else who will hear about what happened here today. The story of the cleaning crew member who saved the base is going to spread, Weaver. You can't stop it. What you can control is what you do with the opportunities that story creates. Cassidy nodded slowly, still processing everything that had happened in the past hour. The past day. The past 10 years. I need time, she said finally. Time to think about what you're offering. About whether I'm ready for it. Take the time you need. Ashford glanced at Holloway, who stepped forward with a small package. In the meantime, I'm reassigning you from the cleaning crew. Effective immediately, you're attached to Chief Holloway's team as a provisional member. Not a full operator, but not support personnel either. Something in between while we figure out what you're really capable of. Holloway handed her the package. Inside was a new uniform, fresh and clean, with specialist insignia and a unit patch she didn't recognize. It's temporary, Holloway said, but it gets you out of the cleaning crew and into a position where your skills can actually be developed. Cassidy held the uniform, feeling the weight of what it represented. A new identity, a new purpose. A second chance at the life she'd lost when her parents died on a snowy highway 10 years ago. Thank you. She said the words inadequate, but the only ones she could find. Don't thank me yet, Ashford replied. Thank me when you've completed sniper school and earned your place. Thank me when you've proven that today wasn't a fluke, but the beginning of something extraordinary. He stood and extended his hand. Cassidy rose and shook it, feeling the firm grip of a man who had seen enough of life to recognize potential when it stood in front of him. Welcome to the fight, Weaver, the real one. The night that followed was the longest of Cassidy's life. She found herself walking the perimeter of the base in the small hours, moving through the darkness, with the restless energy of someone who couldn't face sleep. The compound was quiet now, the chaos of the day replaced by the subdued rhythm of recovery. Guards manned their posts with heightened alertness. Medical personnel worked through the night treating the wounded. Somewhere in the distance, the low hum of generators provided a constant backdrop to the desert silence. Cassidy ended up at the range. The training area where she'd collected brass casings for 3 months was cordoned off now, part of the ongoing investigation into the attack. Yellow tape marked the boundaries. Shell casings still littered the ground where they'd fallen during the fighting. She stood at the edge of the tape looking at the concrete pillbox where everything had changed. The sandbags were torn and scattered from enemy fire. Dark stains marked the places where blood had soaked into the dirt. Her blood. Holloway's blood. The blood of people she'd killed. Couldn't sleep either. She turned to find Donovan approaching from the direction of the barracks. His arm was in a sling and he moved carefully, but his eyes were alert. "No," she admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them. The faces through the scope." Donovan nodded, coming to stand beside her at the edge of the tape. "That's normal. First time I killed someone, I didn't sleep for 3 days. Kept replaying the moment in my head, wondering if I could have done something different. If there was some other way." Was there some other way? No, that's the thing about combat. In the moment, you do what you have to do to survive and protect your people. It's only afterward that you have the luxury of second-guessing yourself. They stood in silence for a moment, two people who had nothing in common except the experience of taking human lives and living with the consequences. "Holloway told me about your father," Donovan said eventually, "about the shooting competitions, about what happened." Cassidy tensed, uncomfortable with the intrusion into her past. "He wasn't gossiping," Donovan added quickly. "He was explaining, trying to help the rest of us understand how someone from the cleaning crew could do what you did today." "I'm not sure I understand it myself." "That's because you're thinking about it wrong." Donovan turned to face her, his expression serious. "You're asking yourself how a cleaning crew member could become a sniper in one day. But that's not what happened. What happened is that a sniper spent 10 years pretending to be a cleaning crew member, and today she stopped pretending." The words hit Cassidy with unexpected force. She'd been framing her situation as a transformation, a sudden change from one thing to another. But Donovan was suggesting something different, that she'd always been this person, that the years of invisible work and buried dreams hadn't changed who she was at her core. "My father used to say that some people are born to shoot," she said quietly, "that it's in their blood. He was right. I've worked with a lot of shooters over the years. Some of them are good because they've trained hard and developed their skills through practice. But the really exceptional ones, the ones who can do things that seem impossible, they're different. They have something inside them that can't be taught. You think I have that? I think you killed 23 enemy fighters in a single engagement with a weapon you'd never fired before. I think you outdueled a sniper with 47 kills and 2 years of experience hunting our people. I think the chief, who's one of the best judges of talent I've ever known, saw something in you worth watching for 3 months before you ever picked up a rifle." Donovan shrugged his uninjured shoulder. "So yeah, I think you have it. The question is what you're going to do with it." The sun rose over the mountains 3 hours later, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that seemed impossibly beautiful after the violence of the previous day. Cassidy watched it from the roof of the barracks, having climbed up there sometime before dawn to escape the weight of enclosed spaces. She was thinking about her father. Not the details anymore. Not the specific memories of frost on grass or the weight of her first rifle. Just him, his certainty, the way he'd looked at her as if he could already see the woman she would become. She understood now what he'd seen. The potential she'd spent 10 years burying. The talent that had been waiting for exactly this moment to break through. Something had changed yesterday. Something that couldn't be unchanged. 3 weeks later, Cassidy stood in the pre-dawn darkness outside a military transport plane at Joint Base Andrews. Her duffel bag sat at her feet. A folder of orders and evaluations and recommendations was clutched in her hand. Around her, other personnel moved through the organized chaos of military air travel, preparing for the flight that would carry them to the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility in Virginia. She was wearing the new uniform Ashford had given her. The specialist insignia gleamed on her collar. The unit patch on her shoulder marked her as something other than support personnel for the first time in 8 years. In her pocket, she carried 2 items. The challenge coin Holloway had given her the day of the attack, and a photograph of her father worn and creased from years of being carried, showing him teaching a 12-year-old girl to hold her first rifle. The flight was scheduled to leave in 45 minutes. In Virginia, 18 weeks of the most demanding sniper training in the world awaited her. She would be tested physically, mentally, and emotionally in ways she couldn't imagine. Most candidates who entered the program washed out before completion. The few who succeeded became legends. Cassidy had no idea if she would be one of them, but she was going to find out. The training facility emerged from the morning mist like something from another world. Cassidy stepped off the transport bus with 15 other candidates, her duffel bag heavy on her shoulder, her eyes taking in the ranges and buildings and obstacle courses that would define the next 18 weeks of her life. Everything about the place spoke of purpose and precision. No wasted space, no unnecessary decoration. Every structure designed to transform talented shooters into something more. The other candidates were already sizing her up. All men, all from combat units, all carrying themselves with the confidence of people who had earned their places through years of service and proven performance. They looked at her cleaning crew assignment patch, still visible on the duffel bag she hadn't had time to replace, and their expressions shifted through various shades of dismissal. She'd expected this, had prepared for it, but the reality still stung. A familiar voice cut through the morning air. Candidates will form up on the yellow line in 2 minutes. Anyone not in position will be invited to return to their previous assignments. Cassidy turned to find Holloway standing at the entrance to the main training building. He was walking without a limp. His wound apparently healed his presence, commanding immediate attention from every candidate on the field. His eyes found hers for just a moment. A slight nod. Nothing more. Whatever relationship they developed in the aftermath of the attack would have to be set aside here. She was a candidate like any other. She would be judged by the same standards. The candidates formed up with varying degrees of military precision. Cassidy took her position at the end of the line, making herself small out of habit, then caught herself and straightened her spine. She was done being invisible. Holloway walked the line, slowly examining each candidate with the critical eye of someone who had seen too many promising shooters wash out to take anything for granted. You are here because someone somewhere believed you had the potential to become something exceptional, he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent formation. You are here because your records suggest you have the raw talent and the mental discipline required to master the most demanding form of combat in modern warfare. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over them. Most of you will fail, not because you lack skill or dedication, but because this program requires something that can't be measured on a shooting range or a physical fitness test. It requires the ability to look at another human being through a scope, make the decision to end their life, and live with the consequences for the rest of yours. Cassidy felt the truth of those words in her bones. She already knew what that felt like, 23 times over. Over the next 18 weeks, you will be pushed past limits you didn't know you had. You will learn techniques that will make you among the most lethal individuals on the planet. You will discover whether the person you thought you were has any relationship to the person you actually are. Holloway reached the end of the line, turning to face the group. Any questions? One of the candidates raised his hand, tall, muscular, with the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in any room he entered. Sir, I heard one of the candidates is from a support unit, cleaning crew specifically. Is that true? His tone made clear what he thought about that possibility. It's true, Holloway replied evenly. With respect, sir, this program has standards, selection criteria. How does someone from the cleaning crew qualify? Holloway's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something cold and sharp. That candidate has 23 confirmed kills from a single engagement, including a hostile sniper with 47 kills who had been hunting our people for 2 years. She accomplished this with a weapon she'd never fired before in conditions that would have broken most operators I've worked with. The confident candidate's expression flickered with uncertainty. She's here because she earned her place in the only way that matters, Holloway continued, by performing under fire when performance was the only thing standing between survival and catastrophe. Something I suspect you've never had to do, candidate Morrison. Your record shows range qualifications and training exercises. Impressive scores in controlled conditions, but you've never pulled a trigger when the target was shooting back. Holloway turned to address the entire group. Let me make something clear. I don't care about your previous assignments. I don't care about your gender. I don't care about your assumptions regarding who belongs here and who doesn't. I care about one thing and one thing only. Can you do the job when it matters? He paused, letting the silence stretch. Some of you will discover that the answer is no. That's not failure. That's information. But those of you who can do the job, who can perform when lives depend on your precision and your judgment, you will become something rare, something valuable, something that very few people in this world have the capability to be. His eyes found Cassidy's again. Prove me right, candidates. Show me that I didn't waste my time bringing you here. The formation broke for processing and barracks assignment. Cassidy collected her gear and followed the others toward the administrative building, already feeling the weight of 18 weeks pressing down on her. Hey! She turned to find another candidate falling into step beside her, shorter than the others with a wiry build and eyes that held more intelligence than aggression. I'm Patterson, Mike Patterson, Echo Company 2nd Battalion. Weaver, Cassidy Weaver, the one with 23 kills. She nodded, bracing for judgment or dismissal. That's impressive, Patterson said simply. Morrison's an ass, by the way. Don't let him get to you. Half the candidates here are more worried about proving something than actually learning anything. And you, I'm here because I want to be better at my job, which means learning from anyone who has something to teach, including someone who took out Viper with a rifle she'd never fired. Cassidy felt something loosen in her chest. Not everyone here would be an enemy. Not every interaction would be a test. Thanks, she said. Don't thank me yet. I'm probably going to ask you 100 questions about wind reading and target acquisition over the next 18 weeks. Fair warning. Despite everything, Cassidy found herself smiling. Fair enough. The sun was climbing higher now, burning off the morning mist, revealing the full scope of the training facility spread out before them. Ranges extending into the distance, obstacle courses and shoot houses and classrooms where the science of precision shooting would be broken down into its component parts. Somewhere in that complex, the next 18 weeks of her life waited. Challenges she couldn't imagine. Failures she would have to overcome. Moments when everything she thought she knew about herself would be tested and questioned and rebuilt. But she wasn't afraid. She'd been afraid for 10 years. Afraid of wanting something she might not be able to have. Afraid of hoping for a future that might never come. Afraid of being the person her father had raised her to be. That fear had died on a dusty range in Afghanistan, buried under the weight of 23 souls and the certain knowledge that she was capable of things she'd never imagined. Whatever came next, she was ready. Cassidy shifted her duffel bag on her shoulder and walked toward the administrative building, toward the beginning of the rest of her life. Behind her, the person she used to be faded into memory, the invisible woman who collected brass casings while dreaming of something more. The orphan who had buried her potential along with her parents. The soldier who had accepted her limitations because acceptance was easier than hope. Ahead of her lay challenges and trials and the hard work of becoming someone new. She touched the photograph in her pocket, her father's face frozen in time, teaching a 12-year-old girl to hold her first rifle. I found my way back, she whispered. The Virginia wind carried her words away, and Cassidy Weaver walked forward into her future. She had been just a cleaning crew member collecting brass casings on a training range, until an enemy attack began and a SEAL handed her his sniper rifle. And everything changed. But this wasn't an ending. This was barely the beginning.